Hey everybody, in today's tutorial video we're going to be building up some terrain and then cutting a big old hole in it. So let's go ahead and do it. Okay, so before we jump into the tutorial steps themselves, I wanted to go through a few example files of what I've done in the past. And really what we're going to be covering today, we're talking all about how to model essentially topography within ArchiCAD, and then how to start excavating certain chunks of earthwork out of it. So really that's the topic for today's tutorial. And yeah, I hope you enjoy as we run through it. So so today I want to look at just a few quick example files before we get into it. And this, what we're looking at here, is just an example of a typical mesh that I'll create that represents essentially the topography as accurately as we can get it. So typically I like to build this from whatever available sources I have. Ideally some sort of civil drawing that actually has nice clean topography line work, and so I'll bring that in and reference that into my project, and then from there I will start actually going through and creating the lines and assigning the elevations. So we will we'll walk through the steps of creating those lines and assigning the elevations in the step-by-step tutorial today, but yeah, I wanted to show you some of the things that we can do here within ArchiCAD and what I've done in the past. So if we go back to 3D here, what we're looking at is this is a mesh. And essentially the project in this particular case was essentially centered in this area where you can see the additional topo lines that I've added in here. And what's unique about this project is we actually had some borings that were done that we could actually take and use to kind of map out the different levels of earth within this project. So if we look down here, we can see that we have different boring numbers, and each of those numbers give us a certain depth and then a different classification of how tough it is to actually rip, or in some cases having to possibly blast through different surfaces. So from these boring maps, what's really cool is we can then actually, if I go to my floor plan view here, we can turn on that boring map as just a reference. And then we can actually start going through and dropping in just individual columns and using the depths found from the different surveys performed, and actually use that to map out the depth, in this case to the rock. So to open up a view here, this is actually the a representation of boring down to a subsurface of rock, so that we can then figure out how much of the excavation is going to be what I call soft excavation, which is essentially the earthwork layers on top of that, and then down to the specific rock layers, and how many layers of rock do we have, what are the approximate volumes. And that's one of the really cool things that we can do, is by taking a boring map, we can map those and then find the difference between what we're expecting to be really hard and difficult and expensive, and what is going to be nice and soft and easy to get through. So so that's part of it. What I wanted to talk about today is just how to we'll go through, and in our exercise we'll actually go through and we'll add different layers of topography, and of course from those layers we can calculate the volume. So we'll walk through the steps of how to do that, but we'll also talk a little bit about actually the retaining systems that we can use as well. So this particular project is an example of a soil nail type retaining system, where essentially you're just nailing in and you're not having an active tension put on those elements, but you're actually just using the friction of the ground to maintain that soil stability. The other type that we're going to be looking at is going to be a tieback type with the shoring and soldier pile, and we'll take a look at that here in a second. But let's just isolate this. Again, this is a just to show you real quickly, this is what we call a soil nailing wall, which is actually a combination of shotcrete and soil nails, which those soil nails are typically on about a 5x5 or 6x6 spacing, depending on what the engineers specify. And so that's what we're looking at here. This is an example of a soil nailing deep excavation. But I also want to take a look at here. Let me minimize this and we'll pull up another example. So this is what a lot of people typically think of when they think about shoring, and that is the more traditional soldier piles with tieback anchors. So this is the method that we're going to be working with today. And yeah, I just really wanted to show the difference between those two. The spacing on these types of anchors is always or typically located in the soldier beam themselves, and so you actually have a little sleeve through there, and then you drill your hole, and then you grout it, and then you tension it after the fact. So okay, so with that, I think that's a good enough introduction into shoring and what we're going to be covering today. And yeah, so let's go ahead. I'm going to close these files. We'll just save that and close. Let me close this as well. And we will get into today's exercise. So I'm going to start out by really there's going to be about 4 main parts of today's tutorial. We're going to start by talking a bit about site topography, and we'll talk a little bit about what source we're using in today's tutorial as a reference. And then we're going to actually start modeling in different excavation volumes and using the solid element operators that we have available in ArchiCAD to really start narrowing down our volumes and getting precise volumes based off complex geometry. And then the third part is we're going to start adding in some of the tieback shoring, which is the soldier piles with those tieback anchors. So that's the type of shoring method we'll be using today. And then our part 4, we'll talk a little bit about how we can take all these volumes of earthwork as well as different shoring methods and how we can summarize those into the data view of the model, which is, of course, essentially a trade quantity schedule. So we'll be talking about this towards the end after we've gone through and modeled everything. So, okay, so back to part 1. So the source that we're going to be using for today's tutorial, I was just flying around in Google Earth, and I wanted to pick out a site that I thought would be interesting to actually go in and perform some excavation on. So what I've done is I kind of located a site here. This is in between Santa Monica and Malibu in California here. This is probably considered the Palisades. But I was looking at just some of these cliffs right above the main PCH drag here, and I was thinking that maybe this would be a cool site just to perform some quick excavation workflows on. So what I've done is I've actually gone to a source that I recently found. Shout out to David from Swinnerton, who provided some feedback on a LinkedIn group blog post. And yeah, so I found this source here, which actually is pretty cool. This is available if you're in the county of Los Angeles, but there's a lot of different layers of information here. But one of the things I really like about this is it does have some basic topo lines in this this online resource available for free, but it also has this pictometry viewpoint, which is what we're really going to be using today, and that has a little bit more accurate topography lines, which are actually located on every on 10-foot increments. So it's not super accurate, but for the purposes of today, it's certainly will suffice. And happy to be able to use a source like this that's available for free and something that we can actually do a lot with. So if I really wanted to get super tight on the tolerances of the excavation, I'd hopefully try to get down to at least every 5 feet or every individual foot increment for my topo lines. But at this stage, for what we're looking at today, we definitely do not need that level of detail. So, okay, I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to we'll close out Google Earth. And so what I'm going to take a look at now is just what I've set up in this site already. So what I do have already modeled in here is I just have a topography, essentially a mesh that I have assigned to a layer that's just called Site Google Earth Topo. And so this is what I'm going to use as really my base layer. But if we actually turn on our trace reference here, you can see that that is my source file from that that Navigate LA pictometry view that we had. So I actually have that on just a worksheet here. And so what I've done is I've gone through, and regardless of what type of reference file I have, whether it's a civil file, whether it's a DWG or whatever it may be, really the whole goal is to get your topography lines modeled in a format that we can then take and quickly apply to our mesh. So what I've done here, just for the sake of time, this probably took about, maybe 15-20 minutes to trace over all of these lines. And that's really all they are. These are just polylines. And so each individual one is just a continuous line, which makes it nice so that you don't have to deal with grouping of individual lines. And so what I've done is I've just traced right over, and for each of those 10 increments coming through from our source imagery here, I've added those lines in. So if we go back to our floor plan view, again, we're looking at our worksheet as a trace reference. And I always like to put these types of documents under my worksheets. I have several different worksheets here for different types of reference content. And in this case, we're just referencing in our topo survey imagery. So at this point, if I grab that mesh and we go to 3D here, you can see that I've also, right now we have just a very flat mesh. There is no elevation to it. But you can see that I've also already mapped through our surfaces. I've already taken that same texture that we saved out as an image, or that I saved from our source file, and then I did a quick measurement on it to scale it to find the overall size of it, and then I've mapped that imagery to my Google Earth aerial texture here. So at this point, we're really at that stage where we can then start building up the site. So we've talked a little bit about what information we're bringing in. It's already been placed. We've already dropped in or I've already mapped out the topography lines. And then now we can actually go through, and on the step 5 here, we're going to elevate our mesh to the correct topography. So the quick way of doing this is if we just select our mesh, and I always like to make sure that I'm on my mesh tool, and we can just go through, and because we have these lines turned on as a reference here, all you have to do is, this is a perfect opportunity to use the magic wand tool, and by hovering over that line and holding down the space bar, we can actually just start creating these individual lines. So I can go through and do this very quickly for all of them, and I like to go through, and I do like to do all of them at once, and then I like to go back through and start assigning the elevations. So this will take just a few minutes here, but to me, this is like one of the most satisfying tasks to actually do, is to go through, map out your topography, and at the end of the day, once you have all those lines in, it's really quick and fun, and it's one of those enjoyable tasks where all the hard work of setting up the projects, getting it scaled, getting it in the right location, and going through and tracing out your line work if you don't have another source that brings in your line work for you. It's just a really kind of satisfying workflow to go through. So okay, we're almost done here with just adding in these lines. So if we look at our scale here, we're going from essentially up here 210 feet down to our sea level, and our base level here is set to 0. So okay, so at this point, if we go to 3D, just by grabbing it and going to our hitting F5 in this case, since I'm on a PC, we can see all those lines are in there, and we can see that they're very well meshed up with the topo lines that we had from our source imagery file. So okay, so now let's go through, and we'll just start at the very top here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on this point right here. I'm going to go to my Z, and we're going to modify our Z, and we're going to assign it to, in this case, we could actually use our sea level. And actually, that's one thing I want to talk about here real quickly is because we have a sea level and we have a project 0. And so let's look at our stories before we start actually setting up this entire project. So what I'm using right now is I have a level 1 that's really at my base 0 point for this project, and then we're going down a few stories by 15 feet, and we're going up a few stories by 15 feet. And so it's kind of important to look at where we probably want to start and what we want to assign as our base elevation. And how we do this is we actually can come in here under our options, and under our project preferences, we go to our project location. And so under our project location here, it's the altitude, the sea level that we really want to pay attention to, because we would want to set this wherever we want our 0, elevation to be located. So essentially for our level 1, we want that to equal this altitude. So in this case, I think 100 feet is probably right where we want to be, because we'll be using essentially this topo line here as a reference for what our finished floor elevation of our level 1 story is going to be. So it's always really helpful to make sure that you set this up right from the very beginning. You can of course adjust it later, but it's it's really helpful to have that altitude set up and know just what elevation we're going to be working to. So if we're using 100 as our base elevation for this project, then if we start coming in here, let's look at what our elevation is. So right now under our project 0, it's all set at 0. But if we change this to our sea level, we can see that those values are now 100 feet. So looking at this in 3D, everything here, all these points, if I come in here to my Z elevation, we can see our elevation 0 and our Z coordinate is 100 feet. So we get both those feedbacks at the same time. And so that's really, looking at this entire plane, that's really going to be cut at our baseline. So if we come in here, now that we've talked about those elevations, that makes it a little cleaner to understand what we're going to be specifying these to. So if I'm going by sea level, which in this case is what I want to do, then I'm actually going to set these to, in this case, I'm going to set this to 210 feet. And I'm going to apply it to all, because when I do apply to all, every single node on that line that we created with the magic wand operation is going to be set at that elevation. So let's just do one here, and we'll go to 3D and see how that looks. So, okay, so there we go. We have one that's set to 210. And to just kind of look at things on the opposite end of the scale, down here, these are probably going to be, this point will probably be, if we go to sea level, that should really be 0, because that is literally sea level. So I'm just going to apply to that single node there. And then maybe this point right here, I'm going to apply to maybe like, I don't know, it's essentially where the waves are crashing on the beach. So maybe we'll put that at like 5 feet. And so let's go back to 3D and kind of see our two constraints. So there we go. We have our top constraint at 210, and then we have our 0 point down here, and then we have a few feet above that. So, okay, so that at least gives me a good perspective on how we're going to be adding the rest of these. And so at this point, let's just go ahead and we will select our mesh, and we're just going to blast through all of these. So I'm just going to click this and set this to 200, apply to all, and bear with me as we go through these. 190, 180, 170, 160. And as we do this, we can see that it's actually creating those user-defined lines. So when I click on 150, we can see that right now it's still set at 100, but as soon as I click on 150 here and assign that elevation, it's creating a slope between that 150 mark and the next topo line, which is, in this case, is 140. So let's keep going with this. So 140, 130, 120, 10. There's a lot of other ways of bringing in meshes also. And okay, so sorry, I started talking and screwed myself up. Yeah, okay, so we're at 100 there, so we didn't have to change that one. This one will change to 90. So you can bring in topos and create them from a number of different sources. So we'll do some other tutorials on those sources themselves. Actually, we did one not too long ago on GIS, and we used SketchUp as a source for bringing in essentially a topography that we can then use for calculating different reference points, or yeah, essentially we're using whatever the topography just as a reference point for calculating excavation. But yeah, there's a lot of different sources we can bring through, and so we'll definitely do some others on that as well. I'm going to cut this road and make both sides of my road at 30, and so that way it's just a flat road. And then from 30, maybe we'll drop down, I don't know, 15 feet over the course of all this kind of rock wall there. And then from 15, we're going down to 5. So, okay, let's see how this looks in 3D. There were a few up here that we didn't get to, but let's see how that's looking. Okay, so for the most part, it's not too bad. We got something happening over here. I'm just going to take this point and push that down. So that cleaned up a lot of this. And then we have this whole area over here, which we could probably even out real quickly. So let's just do that to make sure that we're totally covered here. So we'll add in our 60, 70, 80, and then we'll add that last point. So it's 50, apply to all, 60, 70, 80, and then that last point we can leave at, I don't know, it's probably like, it's pretty steep on that corner, so push that up. Okay, so there we go. So I'd say for the most part this came through pretty good. Once in a while in ArchiCAD you get some of these kind of weird things where if you have a complex surface like this, then sometimes it just kind of cuts that imagery out. And I've found that if you take these points and kind of move them around a little bit, sometimes you can get that to be fixed. But of course, by us doing this, we're kind of manipulating the mesh off of our original topo line. So for the point of today, we're just going to leave those and we'll have to be happy with it. And okay, so there we go. We now have a nice topo mesh. Didn't take too long. And yeah, let's go back to 2D now. And yeah, you know what? Okay, yeah, we're good. Okay, so I think we've gone through and we've elevated our mesh. We've set our project 0 to, in this case, we're doing to 100. And so at this point, we can now move on to our part 2, which is when we'll actually start dropping in some excavation volumes. And so down here, I have a an excavation, and you can see my for my project 0, I have it at 0, and my top is set to 15 feet. So if you recall, each of our stories in this project are set to 15 feet, just so that we have a nice kind of clean, even story height. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually come in here and I'm going to just take this and I'm going to just drop it in somewhere within my boundaries. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start kind of pushing and pulling these, this excavation volume. So if I had a real project that we were designing based around, then of course I would bring in into my trace references here, I'd probably bring in both a combination of structural framing plans and use those as a reference, or architectural plans, or even civil plans, and I bring in like a grading plan from my civil engineer and use that as referencing in and comparing between all those different document types to make sure that everything is designed in alignment. But in this case, we don't have any design. We're just kind of walking through the steps. So we can go ahead and just really take this and push and pull it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of carve out a few levels here. And so I'm going to probably just, I don't know, maybe this has kind of a unique shape, and maybe we're doing some sort of like trapezoid shape, so that our front of this on this ground level is kind of coming out just a little bit past that 100 mark, and the back of it if that's a property line right there, then maybe we have a few foot offset from the back. And maybe we could push this over just slightly. And okay, so let's see how that looks. So I'm going to do a marquee around just this area right here. And okay, so there we go. We have our first mesh in there. And what I'd like to do at this point is I'm also just going to copy these, because we have that in here. We can actually see that we can see where our base point is, and then we can see that we're cutting up about halfway through that next level there. And yeah, so I'm satisfied with that. And again, what we're doing with these meshes is this is essentially something we're going to operate on, so that for each level, we're just going to essentially merge it in with our base topo. So, so back here, we're going up to our level 2 now. I can roll some of these up, and I'm just going to copy and paste that mesh in there. And so we can see that we're just building this up. And if we're cutting our shoring line on this back corner here, then we probably need to go up just slightly more. So we'll go, and I'm going to do a control up and go to my level 3 and paste it one more time. And let's just kind of see how that fits there with the back of our site. Okay, so that's pretty close there. If I set this to say 50 feet and we just went up a little bit extra, that's fine, because that's going to at least cut our entire site up until that point. And maybe we have a few basement levels here, and let's go in and we'll go down to our basement 1, and I'm going to paste that in as well. And maybe on our basement level we should be pulling this out a little bit further. We'll just pull it quite a ways, and maybe we step it here in the back. Leave it right there. And we'll paste one more down here. And maybe we'll look at our foundation level, and we can also add in one more. Yeah, let's just do that. We'll add in one more down here. And this one, maybe we won't set so deep. We'll adjust it there in a second. In 3D, probably a little easier. Okay, so there we go. We have a bunch of different meshes in there, and we got 1, 2. Did I mess up there? Did I do 2 on the same level? I think I did. Okay, so we're just going to leave. I'm going to undo that. Sorry. I'm going to delete the one off my foundations level. We'll just use our basement for now. And okay, so one other thing I'm going to do here is this mesh is actually drawn in just as a with just a top structure. So let's go ahead and let's change that so that it's fully thickened out. And let's check our settings there. That's a little strange while we're not seeing the edge of it. What's going on there? Oh, so my base level here on my project 0, let's actually turn this to a C level. So my base level, need to set that down to 0. That way we can get our full thickened volume all the way down. So that was our issue right there, while we weren't seeing the full thing. Okay, so there we go. Now that we have these meshes in here, what I'm simply going to do is I'm just going to select them all. And the tool we're going to be using next is our solid element operators. So there's a few different ways that we could run these operations, but what I'm going to start with is just taking all of our excavation volumes as targets. And so they're already selected when I pulled open this tool, so they already are targets. And I'm going to pick up my operator, and I'm going to essentially just do an intersection in this case. So we could do as well a subtraction with upwards extrusion would also work, but I'm finding that I like using the intersection more and more these days over some of those others in this type of scenario. So let's go ahead and we'll just execute. And if we hit F5, we can see that there are all of our volumes. So, okay, we got them all in there. They're actually all set to that to be demolished setting. So anytime I'm doing excavation, I always like setting it on that demo layer so that we can essentially cut it out of our site. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hover over this, grab all those. And so now that we have the right shape on those, we can actually just go in and let's do this. We'll make these our operators. And essentially we're going to reverse the process, and we're actually going to make our topography our target. And what we're just going to do is we're just going to do a typical subtraction. So when we do this, what it's going to do is it actually maintains that original subtraction that we did, or sorry, it maintains the original intersection. So if we actually come in here and if we were to say adjust some of these after the fact of that original mesh, it would actually automatically update into our excavated volumes. So that's kind of nice because it maintains those original elevations, and yeah, it's a pretty nice way of doing it. So another thing to remember here is each of these layers are set to 15-foot increments. So if we wanted to get a lot more granularity in terms of the volumes and cuts that we're using, then we could just essentially, instead of doing essentially one mass for every story, we could break those up into sub stories also, and maybe do every 3 feet or 5 feet might be a good test in this case. But if we take those few that we added in, we could actually give ourselves just a little bit of a differentiation by just changing the color of those, so that we can then get a little bit more visual feedback. That's what I did in some of those other files, is I just changed the color slightly just so that we can see those different volumes. So okay, so now that we have those in there, we can actually just change our state. So right now we're on our show all. Let's go to our existing plan. So okay, we're still good. Let's go to our demolition plan, so we can see there that we're demoing all of that. And then after demolition, there we go. So we can now see very clearly essentially the faces of our excavation that we have to work with, and essentially the faces that we would need to shore up in this case. So that's quite a bit of shoring, but I think we can do that pretty quickly. And let's go ahead and we'll go back to our 2D, and I'm going to just leave this under. Let's go back up to our level 1 story. And so let's come down and we'll check and make sure that we did everything here that we wanted. So we did go through the story by stories. We added the volumes. We did an operation. We actually didn't do of the top of the elevations. We did a intersection in this case. So operate to intersect is essentially what we ended up doing. We didn't have to operate to the subgrade. Sometimes that I'll do a operate to the top and then an operation to the bottom if I have two different planes that I want to calculate the volume in between. So in this case, this didn't really apply because we were just cutting down to certain elevations based on our stories. And yeah, so we did operate our site topography, which was a subtract. And yeah, so we didn't really review the volumes, but if we go to our earthwork schedule, we can see that we have our level 3 through our basement 2. We have essentially, this is just a basement excavator by dozer with a unit cost in our cubic yards. And then of course we have our volume over here, which we can see and verify. And yeah, and so that essentially is our main volumes that we wanted to achieve. So okay, time to add in some shoring. So let's take a look now at our tiebacks. And what we have here is, if we do a marquee around this particular section, let's just take a look at our tieback shoring system. So what we have here is a combination of soldier beam piles, which are the main structural, the vertical structural support. We have our shoring or our legging, and the legging here is actually broken out. And if we look at these elevations here, if we go to project 0, we can see that it's actually from our top down. So we'll have to look at those and just make sure that these are set to the right story. So that's set to basement 2 as its home. This one should actually probably be set to basement 1. And so that got pushed down, but we'll set this to right there. Okay. And yeah, then we have a little bit down here, looks like on our foundations level. So, okay, so with this, let's go ahead and we can start adding these in. And we could either copy and paste these around in 2D or in 3D. I'm actually going to do it in 2D. And instead of copying this, I'm just going to take this entire thing, including my section, and I'm just going to grab right here and pull this entire thing over. And so on my level 1, where I want to start is, we'll probably start just on this back corner right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this, and I'm actually going to push this out just slightly so that the face of my legging is on the face of my excavation. So that way I can see, or I should be able to see, this entire assembly here. So let's just go to 3D and kind of see how that fits in with everything. Oops, I moved things without copying all stories. So let's undo that. Sorry. I did have all those elements grouped, but I need to make sure that I'm not suspending my elements so that we can move all these without an issue, and it's going to move them all on each of our stories. So, okay, so there we go. Again, I'm going to kind of take my shoring and snap it right there to the face of my legging. And, okay, so there we go. And let's take a look at it now and see how that looks and where it ended up. Okay, so it's kind of lost down there. It's stuck in the bottom there. And so what I want to do is I probably just need to grab all of this, and if I do a nice selection. So again, maybe this wasn't the best place to start with this shoring, because this was set up essentially on our first floor going down. So it's essentially from this point going down. So maybe we should start it where we have our right elevation. Would probably be a little smarter on my part. So let's just take this over, and we're going to find where our 100 hits our edge of our shoring. So I'm going to take this and drop it down. And in a case like this, depending on, you know, if you can legally run a tieback across your property line, that might be something to really kind of consider. But let's just take this and, well, let's take a look at it now. See how we're looking. Okay, so there we go. And actually what I might do is, why don't we just take this and we'll pull this out so our legging is entirely in front of that. And so there we go. We're kind of overhanging into our shoring, and that looks pretty good. Okay, so I think I'm liking that. We have a little bit extra down here below, but that volume for our basement, typically you're going to have some over excavation here also. So maybe if we bring back our demolition plan, we can come in here, grab our mesh there, and maybe we'll set this down to like 60. Set this to 65. We'll push that down just a little bit more. Maybe, yeah, that's probably fine. We'll just leave it at 65 so that we're cutting down to include an over X in that basement level. Okay, so let's go back after demolition. And so at this point, we got all these elements here. And we can really start taking this and modifying it around. So I'm actually going to isolate this for a second, and I'm going to take all of my tiebacks here, and I'm actually going to just copy these just straight over, and I'm going to copy from essentially one pile over to the next. And my spacing here looks like it's set up at 8'3". So you know what? I'm going to modify this just slightly. So I'm going to delete this one here. And I just want to be working with nice clean numbers today in terms of our spacing. So everything we do today is going to be based off a spacing of, let's just do 8'4". So that way we have kind of a nice clean distance between the two. And of course, that's always going to be dictated and determined by the shoring engineer. But in this case, I think we're pretty much good. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab all those, my soldier pile and those tiebacks, and I'm going to grab both of these here, and I'm just going to ungroup everything and group it up again. And let's group these up. And we'll bring back everything. And so now I'm going to grab these, and we can really just, because this is kind of dropping down right here, what I'll probably do is I'll probably pull it over, and then I'll start adjusting the elevations of them. So let's do that. And I'm going to do a multiply here, and I'm going to do an increment and spread, and I'm going to leave on my vertical displacement here. So let's just come in and start from that point. I'm going to just push it over a straight 8'4", and then set our increment, and I'm just going to pull it straight out. And then, so the question here is, do I want to adjust everything from the top or the bottom? So what's kind of nice about this is I can really kind of get an average here by using that vertical displacement. And we can drop all these down right there. And so that brings up the next question is, what is the elevation of the tiebacks? Would we actually want them to be sloping in elevation like this? Or would we want them all to be the same level and then just fall off at the top? Like, because obviously we're not going to need tiebacks right here. We can delete those, delete this. If that's a corner of our excavation, then certainly we're not going to have tiebacks down here. Typically you don't have them right in the corners. But yeah, for the most part, that looks pretty good. Maybe this one just gets adjusted down a little bit. And so, okay, so there we go. So that's working. All these down here, these extra layers, I'm going to go ahead and just delete those. And then the rest of these here, for all of that, I'm going to just set the top of these to, let's just go to our sea level. And I think 65 is where our bottom of our excavation is. And we can do that for these as well. So I'm actually going to get rid of the shoring that was on our foundation level. And let's just set these to 65. Okay. So there we go. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of unique surface area calculations that we're getting out of this. But for the most part, I'm pretty happy with that. And okay, so actually one thing I'm going to do here, I'm thinking about right now, if I'm taking this shoring and pulling it up this slope, if I did it from this side and copied this, then the next one up, we're actually going to have this legging overhanging from on this side. So I found that it's a little quicker in this case to multiply it in the other direction. So, let me undo that. We're going to leave that shoring there. And so again, if we do our same multiplication, Control U, we'll multiply, come in here, and I'm going to pull this straight over 8'4" to set my increment, and then we'll pull this about up to probably about to here, And we're going to pull all these up so that we're sloping along that line. And maybe I would have pulled it back a little closer, but for now we'll just leave it like that. So yeah, that's a big face right there. And so really all of these we haven't really been paying too much attention to the height here, but that's the overall height there is about 50 feet. So yeah, there we go. And for these, I'm probably going to pull it down, and I think all of these, I was playing around with this the other day, and I don't think I can just take that -40 and apply it to these all at the same time. We'll try with just a few and see if that works without applying it to the top. So just go -40 to the bottom. And yeah, I can see that it starts to do a little work adjustments at the top there. So something like this, probably just snap all these down. And that might take just a little while. We'll do a few of them. And probably just stop there. If I adjust them all at once, what happens? So I can adjust them all, pull them all down, but I don't think I can have all the bottoms set to that minus without adjusting the tops. Yeah, not quite working in this case for me, but that's okay. So I can see here that we got a lot of different things kind of going on here with these particular elements here. So what I might do is to start laying these out so that they're a lot closer to my actual elevations on these on the legging. What I might do is, instead of having it all adjusted like that, I might just go to my project 0 and set the base, because I'm on my basement 2. If I set this to 0, where does that give me? The top, set that to 15. Zero. I'm going to snap it down there to that point there. So yeah, I think I kind of like that better in terms of these. So let's make these, we can actually link these, the top, and in this case the bottom. We're on our basement level 2, we're on our home story only. Sorry, that should have been set to level 1. Okay, there we go. That would have been much better to do. So we'll straighten these out, and then we'll go through and just kind of pull them through the rest of them really quickly. So top of this, we're on our B1 level, so I'm going to just set that to 0 and 0 and let all those adjust. Okay, so that's a little better, and I can see if I copy these up, and if I reassign that to my level 1, and we'll just snap it back down. So that's looking a little better. And then of course, you know, at this point, that's when I need to come through and just do these adjustments. So that's probably a little better way of modeling in the shoring, just so that you get all of these to really land on the right story in the in our quantity takeoffs. So okay, so with that, let's go ahead, and we're pretty much set up right here on our top elevation. So I'm going to get rid of all those. Our shoring here, I got a little excited and got ahead of myself here with copying these things around, but I'm going to just adjust these down so that they're about where I actually want them. So in these, probably copy them up, and instead of having them on my basement level, we'll have them on our level 1. And so we're going to have a lot of tiebacks along this face, which is fine. And so really we're going to take these, and from this point we can copy those around and then do some adjustments there. So so just for the purpose of getting through the rest of this tutorial without spending a lot of time on this, let's just go very quickly. So I'm going to pull this over to that ledge right there. And I'm just going to pull all those flat. I'm going to delete out those, and I'll probably delete out, actually, you know what? One thing I can do here is I'm just going to rotate this around with a copy here. So we're going to go from that direction, and I'm going to find a point over here that's telling me that I'm going parallel to it, if I can. So it should be somewhere like right there. There's our parallel sign, parallel marker. And so at this point, let's pull this in. Snap it right there. And I'm going to pull this over just one distance here. And hopefully that gets us pretty close. Okay, so with these, drop this down. If we have this big ledge right here, these are already pretty good where we have them. And so now, of course, I could just take this and pull this straight across. And so we don't have to, of course, do all this in 3D. We can do some of this in 2D as well. What I want to do first is just make sure that I'm grouped on all these. So we got 3 tiebacks going through there. That's probably enough for what we're doing now. Okay, we're already grouped. Let's go back to 2D. See how this is starting to show up. So, okay, so we got that line. Our level basement is really the one that's going to give us that cut edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn this on as a trace reference. And looks like we're pretty straight there. And so now let's just do an increment and spread. We'll just do a spread. And I'm just going to click right on this line. And we'll just pull this all the way down. So that looks pretty good. And what I might actually do here is, because I have all these drawn in, I'm just going to take this entire block and pull it up here. And we'll just snap that there. And all those will probably have to elevate. So I'm just going to group them all for the moment. Let's go back to 3D. And so to get these in, I'm going to pull them all up. And actually looking at this now, of course, I would really need to start adjusting these based on the correct story. So like all of these up here, if we just did a find and select, let's just grab all of our walls at that particular positioning. So elevation to project 0, let's grab all those. And so really that's on my, that would be up on my, I think that's level 2 is the highest level that we went up. So if I assign this to level 2, those are going to jump way up. But at least they're on the right level now. Right story. We'll grab all these, make those level 1, and then we can come in and set that to 0. Top to there to 0. Okay. There we go. So could have done a little better job in thinking how I was going to be setting these up, but we can make those adjusted pretty quickly. And obviously we need a level 3 here for some of these, and then we'll just take this and pull that up. And then of course we can, spend, it'd probably take another hour for me to really go through and model the rest of these out. But for right now, just for the sake of trying to wrap this up and keep this within an hour, let's take a look now and just kind of see how all this content is coming through into our earthwork calculations here. So let's see, let's go to our earthwork and see how all these elements are coming through. Okay, so we haven't added anything here to our earth moving. So we have all these coming through. They're all calculating by our cubic yards. And we actually have all these set on our site work package, which is kind of probably nice where we'd probably want that. All of our excavation, support, and protection, all this could probably go to our site work package as well. That's one thing that I'd probably want to go through and correct. And yeah, so there we go. We have a lot. We have shoring all the way up to level 3. We have several of these, so we could of course go through and then just start adjusting these. But for the point of just kind of showing how I would then link all this into an estimate template, what I would do is let's go in here and close that out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up under my reports here, I'm going to open up my estimate template. We'll pull this over. And so I did have some values in here from before. I'm going to actually just refresh these and delete this all out. And what I'm going to do is we will then come in. This is just an estimate worksheet within my overall estimate template. So under my data sources, we're pulling through a specific quantity takeoff from ArchiCAD. And so we're mapping that to our sheet 31, and we're mapping it to that cell there. And so this is kind of my method that I use for all of my different trade quantities. And so if we come down here, we're already on our earthwork. And so all I would do is just publish this out and come back into our estimate template. And if we just refresh this, we can see that we now have all those quantities coming through. And yeah, we have a total price here of, at this point, 1.6 million. We got a little bit of work to go with finishing out the rest of the tieback anchors. We can see we got about $500,000 just in the anchors that we've added. But we certainly have some other stuff coming through here. So we got a little issue here. Let's see what's happening on this one. I got an issue here with my soldier beams. Some of those are not calculating how I want them. So I could come in here and let's see, my length on those is, these are all objects. This was working before. I'm not sure why it's not quite working right now. I don't know if maybe I just pointed this in the wrong field. Object. So in this case, this is actually a good kind of method to troubleshoot right now. So if I look at, so something like this, if I'm obviously estimating this off linear footage of those soldier beams. So each of these soldier beams, I need to kind of just come across here and see what data I have to work with. So there might be a value popping up here because a lot of the times you get that value when you have a foot symbol in your formula. So let's just take a look and see if we can figure this one out. So unit cost, $55. So that's an easy translation over. These are objects. We have quantities on them. So some of them there's several, some of them there's only one. And then what I'm really looking for is the length on that. So I'm looking for my height, which is Z here. So it's this Z. In this case, I'm looking for that Z36 cell for that top one there. So if I'm coming up here under linear footage and it's an object, then I want that Z36. But that error is popping up right now because I need a substitute Z36. And what we need to do is we need to essentially remove that foot marker. And so I'm going to do that. And I think that should do it for us, hopefully. Yeah, there we go. So at that point, now that I've fixed that one formula, just by putting that one substitution in there, again, the issue there is that it was pulling from a cell that had a foot marker in it. And so that's why that one was not working. So, so just to fill out the rest of these, we can get all those calculating, and just to make sure that all my formulas are the same and have been updated with that substitution in there. There we go. We got all that now. So, okay, I'm going to pull this down just to make sure that all these are updated. And okay, so there we go, linked into our estimate. And yeah, let's go back here and just talk real quickly about some of these unit costs. Now, some of these are, of course, just kind of averages, but I want to talk just real quickly on how I came up with this unit cost for cubic yards. And so if I scroll all the way over here, I actually have these being produced by two different values. One cost being produced from the excavation activity itself, but a lot of the times if you're doing a big haul-off job, then depending on how far you're taking the dirt and you know, how big of trucks and how fast you can go, that's really where a lot of the cost often falls into, is not necessarily as much in the excavation, but more so in where you're taking it. So in that case, what I've done here is I just exported all of this using the properties exchange with Excel. And if we go to, let's see, under my share file, my episodes, episode 6, reports, my data exchange. If we go in here, we can just quickly show you that exchange. I use this all the time, and it's a great way of kind of pushing info back and forth with your different estimating teams. So with all these, what I would do is I'd come over here if I wanted to make changes, and say if $8 wasn't enough, and say we wanted to go to $10 there, I could just pull this down for all of these, and say some of my excavation costs, like say the deeper we go here, if we, let me add in, let's freeze some panes here. So I pull this over. Say if I wanted my basement levels to be a little bit higher, say like 350, because it gets tougher dirt or whatever it may be, maybe $4. Let's just do that for those. And so because all these are just values that were just spit straight out of ArchiCAD, and we'll bump these up just a little bit. There's no formulas in these values themselves, but if we come over here to our total unit cost, we can just simply go equals, and we can add a little formula in, excavation plus our haul off. And okay, so there we go. We can see we're updating our costs, and we'll pull that down, save that. Hopefully we don't have any issues importing back in. Import. That's loading. Yeah, so for all these different components of the model, once you've actually gotten it all put in there, that's when I would send it out to probably either my subcontractor or to an estimator, and have them actually go through and fill out the values. So yeah, I think we're good here. Looks like all these are going to import, and as long as our total cost on those volumes updated, then I'll be happy with that. So there they are, they're updated. A lot of the times too, also in these in my estimate form, I like to take my my value and actually just copy this, and then we'll just paste that value, and then that way when I bring in and refresh a new one, it will actually tell me the difference between those two and just kind of gives me an idea of the difference. So let's publish this one more time. And we'll bring it back here and refresh. And so, yeah, so that's giving me a difference. We actually went up in, should probably reverse this. H6 minus H3. So yeah, we went up 329,000 just by adjusting those unit costs slightly. So pretty big numbers coming through here. That's a lot of volume. Yeah, it's pretty cool to be able to calculate it here with models yeah, so that brings us pretty much to the end of this tutorial. Let me go back here to our kind of our checklist of what we wanted to go over. So we talked a little bit about yeah, trade quantity reports, our units, unit pricing, publishing to Excel. We updated some costs, we reviewed the calculations, we actually fixed some calculations. Let's just go back here and I'll show you some of the other units that we were using. So one thing we didn't really use today that maybe we could add in real quickly is a railing. So that's all based off of linear footage here. All the tieback anchors was all based off linear footage, just the length of them. Our shoring or our legging, 3x12s is all just based off square footage there. Soldier beams, we talked about that a little bit in the formulas. Those are all based off linear footage of them. And then we had some additional legging down below here. Yeah, it's the sorting we have on here that is actually kind of changing the order of those. So, okay. Yeah, if there's any questions, then please provide some comments or feel free to comment on the video after the fact. So sorry we didn't get through modeling in that entire range of topography there, but yeah, something like this in this example, there's a lot of variances in these. So that's when you actually really need to, in order to get this to really feel right, you need to really be you know, adjusting it based on each of those different grades. But let me just show you real quickly this railing I have in here. If I pick up my settings there, should be able just to click from point to point, and we could add these in real quickly. And so what that is, that's just a it's essentially just a rail. We could probably drop that down, or actually we could probably go into our settings here on that railing and go into our post, and we'll just set this down like -6 inches so that we get a nice little overhang. And so there we go. So post, safety guardrail, and we could quickly just go through and add in a lot of these. So now we picked up that setting, why is it wanting to start from up there? Let's do associative. I think that's probably my issue there. Come on. Just get this to start from the right point. So if I didn't want to do every single click, I could probably just go straight through there and then elevate. Obviously something I need to play with a little bit more, because that I had it working right from the beginning, and then I picked up the settings from what I thought was working and it was not working. So maybe these settings were better. See if we can get this coming in. Yeah, so I'm not sure why that is acting funky on me, but anyway. So we could quickly just come through and add those all the way across. And those, of course, are not lined up, but I bet if we change these and our spacings to 8'4", wherever that is, our posts, no, it's our inner posts in this case. 8'4". There we go. Okay, so I think that's enough for today. Thank you for checking out this video. And yeah, I'll probably keep working on this and publish this file out into the episodes folder so that we have a complete and total model for this particular example file. And so if you want to access this and all this content, as well as all the other files from these episodes and the entire ContraBIM template system, then yeah, check out our website and take a look at our network, because you can download all of this, including the estimating reports, this entire package, as part of joining the network. So yeah, thanks for signing on and checking out this video today. If you have any questions, then please leave comments on the video, and I will be sure to answer them back. And yeah, hope you all enjoy your weekend, and we will catch you next week, which is we're going to be diving into some structural steel next week, talking about estimating and just some methods for quickly modeling. And yeah, we'll talk about all about structural steel. So stay tuned till next week, and yeah, we'll talk to you all then. Signing off.